What is going on, friends? Got a really short video for you today. I want to talk about one of the things that I have been thinking about for quite some time. I mention this quite often in stream when I get asked this question, like what the best perk in Dead by Daylight is. Um, Spoiler alert, I think it's a survivor perk. I know I'm a survivor player, kind of crazy. I'm not picking a killer perk. I'm not really entitled like that. But yes, I do think it is a survivor perk. If you've been through some of my streams or you've seen some of my videos, you probably already know what I'm going to say. And this isn't going to be a video where I ramble for 30 minutes and, finally tell you what it is at the end. It's Sprint Burst. I think far and away the best perk in the video game, even when you take into consideration killer perks and all the other survivor perks, is Sprint Burst. Obviously, it was probably going to be an exhaustion perk or maybe something like Unbreakable. If we actually pull up Nightlight here, which gives us a look at all of the kind of, I'm not sure if it pulls it, how it pulls this information, but this kind of goes through and gives us like the most popular perks for Killer and Survivor. Sprint Burst isn't really even in the top 5. It is number 6. Lithe is number 2, which is probably the one perk that most people would probably pick as being like the strongest survivor perk, the strongest exhaustion. Some people even think it might just be the strongest perk in general. But I kind of want to go over why I think it's better than Lithe, why I think it's the best perk, and maybe why it also trumps killer perks as well. First of all, Lithe is a better perk, I feel, maybe if you're newer to the game. Obviously, it's a teachable from my girl Fang, so how could I hate on it? But I much prefer Sprint Burst over Lithe. Lithe is kind of one of those perks where you can use kind of whenever you want. You don't have to worry about, am I exhausted because I randomly, sprinted, or, you don't have to pay attention to your exhaustion, the status of it, as much as you do with Sprint Burst. But the thing that I'm not a huge fan of when it comes to Lithe is you need to have a vault, right? You need to be able to trigger a vault, you need a window or a pallet. There are a lot of times based on my looping style when I'm looping Shack where I just want to hit a fast vault, but I don't want to use Lithe. I want to stay there at the tile. Lithe is a great perk for kind of looping in dead zones, in corners of the map, maybe even Z-walls, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take the killer there. I'm going to use a well-timed vault to then make it back into the map. But Sprint Burst to me is just better. First of all, it is a perk that you are going to be able to use more often in a match. You can run around the map sprinting from generator to generator, generator to hook. You can, oftentimes I will find myself getting Sprint Burst back mid-chase, which is an awesome thing to have. Sometimes it happens and I'm not even paying attention. I'm so zoned in on the chase that I just get Sprint Burst back and I'm like, oh, there's a speed boost. I guess I just extend the chase or make it to the next tile. You can 99 your Sprint Burst actually so easily, and that's the one thing that people actually worry about the most, and I think why they choose Lithe over Sprint Burst, if they're going to choose one over the other, because they say to themselves, I don't want to worry about having to 99 my Sprint Burst and have to walk around, and it's just annoying. I find myself walking all over the map, and I see my teammates running it, and they're just holding in Sprint Burst and letting me go struggle on hook. Okay, well, first of all, those people are just using the perk wrong. IMO. First of all, if you're really worried about, holding in Sprint Burst or making sure you don't have to walk around and be slow, combine it with Fixated. Fixated is a great perk to combine with Sprint Burst. Vigil is also a great perk. Sometimes I run a build somewhat similar to this. Obviously, Vigil is good with any exhaustion perk. But Fixated is awesome to use with Sprint Burst. I use this in a variety of different builds, and it also kind of helps you fix that issue of, I don't know if I should be walking around or holding it in or just sprinting. But what I will say, if you want to use Sprint Burst, if you want to get better, use it on command. Use it when you get it. Use it when you have it available. The only time I really pay attention to when my exhaustion is coming off cooldown and, should I... what I should do with Sprint Burst is if I'm working on a generator, somebody is hooked, and my exhaustion is approaching, the point where it's falling off. I'm like, okay, my gen is only 50. Somebody is in chase, that person's on the hook. I should probably go for the unhook, or I might have to. So let me get off the gen before my Sprint Burst, gets back because of exhaustion, and let me essentially 99 my sprint burst and run to the hook. So then that way, when I unhook the survivor, I can sprint burst back. Or if somebody unhooks that survivor, I can just sprint burst back to my gen. Or I can maybe use sprint burst, going for the unhook in a way where, it kind of like works around the killer. Or I can maybe use sprint burst to go hover for a save, for a flashlight save. Those are the only times where I'm really paying attention. But I get so many uses out of sprint burst. I can't really stress it enough. I've talked to a lot of people with, quite a few hours. I have way too many. Way too many hours in this game. Don't put that on the screen, please. I just find myself thinking, if I had sprint burst, I'd probably escape more games. If I had sprint burst in this situation, I probably would have done better. I would have been able to get sprint burst back mid chase, comboing with a perk like fixated, because the chase lasted like a minute and a half, and I was able to kind of do what some people call shift teching, where you let go of sprint and you walk outside of the killer's line of sight. So a good reference would be Shack. Every time you vault the window, then you're going to go around to the door to vault the window again. Anytime you don't see the killer, you can run, and then when you see them and they're in your line of sight and they're looking at you, let go of shift and walk. It's a great way to get sprint burst back during chase if you have high walls where the killer is going to lose line of sight of you. But yeah, I just clearly think sprint burst is a much better perk than Lithe. I think when you're talking about other perks like maybe Unbreakable, I think Unbreakable, while it can save games and can turn things around, it is a little bit more niche. I think sprint burst is just more universal. You're going to get more uses out of it. You can use it probably 10, 20 times in a match. If you 99 your sprint burst for like end game saves or basement saves, I've seen my friends do that many times. I've been saved by it, where somebody will 99 their sprint burst, walk up to Shack, and then the minute that the killer kind of makes a misstep, they sprint down into basement and save me. There are so many instances where you can do stuff like that. As far as killer perks, I would honestly say Scourge Hook Pain Resonance, or Hook Pop as a lot of people call it, is probably a perk where it's up there. I just don't think it's better than Sprint Burst. I think it's been nerfed quite a bit. Actually, I think probably the closest a killer perk has been to the power level of Sprint Burst is maybe during, I don't know if some of you remember the old Eruption and Call of Brine meta, where a killer would like kick a gen, and then if they'd hook a survivor, the gen would blow up, it would regress, the survivor's aura would be revealed, they'd scream. There was so much that happened. Call of Brine Eruption was an insane meta. It was probably the strongest, most annoying killer build meta to ever exist. But what's funny, like, it required 2 perks, whereas Sprint Burst is obviously just 1 perk. But yeah, I definitely, not that I'm using like these numbers as any determination, but Resilience is a really common perk. You can get multiple, multiple uses or like passive use out during a game. Same thing with like Windows of Opportunity. There's actually one perk that isn't even on this like top 8 that I think has gotten buffed recently that I think can maybe, and it's not an exhaustion perk, but it could maybe rival Sprint Burst. But I'm going to save that maybe for a future video where I go through some of the best survivor builds. But yeah, Sprint Burst I think is on top. I think it's better than every other survivor perk. I think it's better than every other killer perk, and that's coming from a survivor player. I just think the value you get from it, the fact that it hasn't been nerfed in years, is just amazing. Obviously all things that exhaustion perks give us in terms of like essentially an extra chance or health state, a speed boost, I think Sprint Burst just does it better. It obviously doesn't give you like as much control necessarily as Lithe in chase, but I think the frequency at which you can use it and the frequency at which you can control it, if you're paying attention to it and you have a little bit more game experience, makes it the better choice over Lithe. And obviously, I think once you get better at the game, stuff like Windows of Opportunity kind of becomes less impactful. I think somebody with thousands of hours in the game who knows how to use Sprint Burst is going to be way better than somebody with thousands of hours in the game, running like Windows of Opportunity and Lithe. But I'm curious to see what some of you think. Maybe you have some insight that, I really didn't think of. Maybe you just think I'm crazy and I'm off my rocker and Sprint Burst sucks. But whatever, if that's the case, let me know. If you agree with me, let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to make maybe some response videos in terms of like what you guys think are better perks. And hopefully I can maybe work on a video here soon of some of, in my opinion, the best survivor builds. And again, this is just my opinion, okay? I think Sprint Burst is the best perk in the game. It has been for a while. It probably will be for a long time. I think the only thing that I dislike is that you can't really use it with Iron Will anymore. And that's kind of sad, because these two perks, you know, together used to be pretty insane, but now Iron Will has been nerfed quite a bit. But yeah, anyways, let me know what you think down in the comments. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you think I'm crazy. I don't know. In the next video. Peace.